Okay, we have made it. This is the last section. This is building focus. Now, we've already been talking about this, much like a lot of the other parts. This has been interwoven with all of them. It's kind of hard to separate them all out into these different uh, five compartments because they're so interlaced. But we're going to talk specifically about building focus right now in this video. So we've already talked about what is a habit and um, and the theory for why our autopilot exists, why we do things unconsciously. It's because we're trying to conserve energy. We've already talked about how oftentimes negative habits or unhealthy habits are built unconsciously, and they actually take quite a lot of self-awareness to be able to break and interrupt that pattern and replace it with something else. Even if we just break negative patterns, that's a triumph in and of itself. But then replacing it with a positive one or a more healthy one is another level beyond that. So we want to go easy on ourselves with these things. When we are building new habits, as I've talked about before, it takes quite a long time. Sometimes it can take 30 days to implement a new habit and then 90 days to make it permanent, right? So we want to understand small incremental gains with these things. You don't want to take on an hour of practice every day and because you might get 7 days into it and then you miss a day and then you miss another day and then you're off the wagon. So we want to start with like 5-minute chunks, okay? Like practice for 5 minutes or try this new healthy thing for 5 minutes or just like one healthy meal per day or whatever it is, what your goals are. And be working towards that in some way on a pretty regular basis. But you don't have to go to the gym every day for an hour or two, right? To build a healthy habit, you can do one push-up a day, and that's building a habit towards more healthy living, for instance, if we're taking that approach. But we're talking about music. Start with 5 minutes. If you can do 5 minutes a day for a month, bump it up to 10, right? And then going from there, we can bump it up to 15 or even 12. You can even do smaller increments. And there's no shame in going back to 10 minutes or 5 minutes if you don't have the time. Even with my own meditation practice, for years I was doing like half an hour every single day. And now, some days I do 10 minutes. Some days I do 20. Some days I do 30. Some days I do 15. It just depends on how much time I have and the amount of focus I'm able to put towards it. Honestly, I probably could make time for half an hour to an hour every single day, but I tend not to. But the habit is there at least, and I don't miss a day of meditation anymore. And I probably play guitar every single day as well. There are days that I don't, but for the most part, I play guitar every day, and I don't see it as if I'm breaking a streak when I don't. So, building meditative focus in our practicing. We've already talked about how to practice, how to chunk isolation and integration. But now we have to talk about actually building the focus part. Because you may have been trying this out, and you may have witnessed that I can only really play something 2 or 3 times before my mind drifts. And we've already talked about this, that when the mind drifts, you just tug it back a little bit. And you allow yourself to drift as long as you come back. You want to be self-compassionate in that way. We don't want to shame ourselves or get angry or frustrated. If you do, it's okay because that's a pattern. We can just think to ourselves, okay, I feel frustrated. I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to come back to focus. Okay? So when we start feeling frustrated, we want to notice, I am feeling frustration. Feel it. Usually this is where people stop. They'll feel frustrated, they'll put it down, and they'll walk away, right? But if we've dedicated to doing like 5, 10, 20 minutes of practice a day, then we actually want to meet that. If it's really, really messing you up, you can stop. It's okay. You don't ever have to take my advice. But since you're here, you made it this far, I'm assuming that you want to learn these techniques. Identified a problem, you want to practice it. And you don't want to practice the problem, you want to practice the solution. And so you're practicing the solution. You repeat it once, slowly. It goes well, you played it perfectly. That's great. You play it another time. Oh, there was a slight mistake. Okay, so you start back at 1. Let's say your goal is to play it 10 times correctly. Now this is a pretty good goal, right? 10 times correctly before integrating and before moving on to something new. So take your chunk. It's got to be pretty small. Couple notes to 1 full bar, let's say. Or like a phrase of a riff. Just so we have a working example. For instance, let's take this riff. This is a part that I play in another one of my songs in my band, Parentheses. So I made a mistake there, right? So if I want to begin to isolate this, right? The riff does this 4 times before changing. So it's lucky that it's already repeating, but we can chunk this into several different parts. We can even just try that. So that's where I'm getting tripped up. Do it slowly. So I've played it 5 times correctly. There was a little bit of string noise in there that I didn't like. So if I don't want other strings ringing through, and I want the notes to be isolated, I have to practice that, right? And I find that my mind starts wandering, right? Oh, I played a note not so good there. I do it again. Oh, I played it not so great there again. Uh-oh, now I'm repeating mistakes, right? So when we find ourselves repeating the mistake, you've played it 3, 4 times in a row correctly, nice and slow. We're nice and close to the frets like we should be. Okay? Then we start to make a mistake. Kind of like a weird note, or I play a wrong note, let's say. I get sloppy. So this is where a lot of people run into that mistake and they think, what the heck, I was playing it right. And oftentimes I think people would call this over practice, but I don't think that this is it. Our focus is running out, and our autopilot is taking over, or we're just getting distracted, and we're thinking about what we're going to have for lunch, and we're thinking about that text message that we're waiting for. We're thinking about if we're going to get that job. We're thinking about all sorts of things. A conversation we had earlier that day. We're thinking about seeing somebody later on, going to work, whatever. Whatever it is you're thinking of, you're now thinking of that and not this. So the first step is to realize, oh, I'm making mistakes. Oh, I'm distracted. Okay. So what do? A lot of times what people do is they'll continue distracted for a while, get frustrated. Well, obviously, I can't play guitar right now. And they put it down and they go do something else. They'll scroll on their phone, or they'll make lunch, or they'll get a snack, whatever. Some kind of unconscious behavior to not have to do what they're doing anymore. But if you're feeling frustrated, you are feeling distracted, feel it. Oh, I'm feeling distracted. I'm feeling frustrated. Okay. So what do I do about it now? Okay. I come back to focus. What was I doing? My goal was to slowly go through this, make sure that I can play it at tempo without making a mistake like that, right? Played it like a few times through very nicely, and then I ran into an open string. And it's okay. Now it's fine, right? But that's the goal. So we want to bring our awareness back to the goal and continue practicing. If we find you're going 1, 2, 3, 4 times correctly, and your goal is to play it 10 times correctly, you play it the 5th time, and you make a mistake. Tragedy strikes. Oh, but I just played it 4 times correctly, and I was so focused. But I guess I lost focus. It's okay. Start again. Come back. Right? Have compassion for yourself. It's normal to make these mistakes. It's normal. And it might be uncomfortable because we don't want to have to continue to do it over and over again 10 times in a row, but maybe slow it down, right? Remind yourself at that 4th time is something that people often don't do. We'll lose focus at the same spot the 4th time or the 5th time, and then we'll try it again. 5th time rolls around, your autopilot kicks in. It's that false confidence. It goes, hey, I got it now. Why don't you take a rest? You think about food or whatever. And then it takes over, but we're relying on the muscle memory that is not yet built. And so we take control again. So as you approach that 4th time, and we play it the 5th time, re-up your focus. Remind yourself, that's right. Re-up your focus. Good. Then we move on to the next bit. Maybe I don't like a certain string tone in there, so I would isolate that and I would chunk it and I would re-up my focus each time that I seem to be losing focus. Right? Slow it down and perfect it. And then you integrate that to the whole. That is really what we're talking about when we're building focus. And this is using that meditative focus that we're talking about. Your anchor is your chunk. The anchor in meditation can often be the breath, the body, a mantra, or a single pointed awareness on a topic or whatever. In this case, you're using that to bring your awareness back to what you're doing, the task at hand. Okay, and this can actually help you enjoy your practice more. If we get attached to the feelings of frustration, we think, I'm so frustrated by guitar, it makes me feel bad about myself, whatever. Again, change that self-talk. Replace that with, okay, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm going to feel that, but I'm still learning. And this is the process to learning the skill. And remember your motivation. Yeah, I want to learn how to play this song. I want to learn how to do this technique. I want to play in a band with my friends. I want, like, whatever it is. And then you kind of help, you use that motivation to help you through that frustration. And then we continue. Okay, I know my motivation. What do? I take a breath. I refocus. I remind myself when I start to get distracted to re-up on my focus. And then we're doing really quite well, actually. Now, for the most part, nobody really does this. Even professional musicians, I find, often are taking a more mindless approach to their practice. But this is something that I found is really the philosopher's stone for improving quite quickly, is taking a mindful approach and focusing your mind. Now, if this is really challenging for you, where you can barely stay focused for one repetition, it's okay. We don't want to be hard on ourselves if we're feeling that way. We want to acknowledge the feeling. Yes, this is uncomfortable to not be able to focus for that long. And we might have thoughts like, well, maybe I'm just not that interested in this. Maybe I wasn't cut up for this. Maybe my focus is just so bad that I'm never going to learn this. We want to acknowledge that, and then we want to think, well, no, I've already learned quite a lot, actually. And I think that there is nothing that I can't do in this. And I've found that people often surprise themselves when it comes to these things. I remember there were some classical pieces when I was learning in music school. I would see somebody play it on YouTube, And it was just unbelievable to me. I thought, this is the most challenging classical guitar song I've ever seen in my life. And they were performing it unbelievably well, to a point where I could probably never aspire to do. Flash forward a year, and I was playing that piece. I was playing it quite well, actually. I had it memorized. My peers around me were quite impressed, because this is kind of, it was regarded as like, oh man, like this guy can play it so good. I learned how to play that piece. And suddenly I was thinking, yes, that was a challenging piece. But I thought I would probably never be able to do it. But then I started anyway. I kept doing it anyway. A little bit by little bit by little bit, I leveled up my playing. And I was playing other things as well. I wasn't just learning that piece. I was learning quite a lot of other pieces that were more my level. And eventually it became my favorite piece to play. So we want to understand our frustrations, replace that self-talk with a hopeful statement, at least. It doesn't have to be super positive, but at least hopeful. We feel the frustration, then we take a breath, we try to release it, we try to not narrativize it, and then we come back to focus. When we come back to focus, we do the same thing once again. If you're finding, yeah, I can barely stay focused at all, this will improve over time. And once again, you have to take the long view. Okay? When we are consciously actually flexing that muscle of focus, then it is strengthening. And this can work across the board. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a week or a month or whatever. It can happen over multiple years. But if you're journaling all the way through it, you might look back and see, oh, like my ability to focus has improved. And we want to take those things as wins. Any improvement in that is a win. And we can apply this to anything, right? If we lose focus during a meeting or a lecture or what have you, we can recognize that we've gotten distracted. And then rather than narrativizing, like, well, I wouldn't have got distracted if this wasn't so boring, or if I had slept right, or whatever. And then that gives us more excuses to not pay attention. We can just re-up that attention until we lose focus, and then we come back. Myself, I've lost focus on what I've been talking about through this very video many times, and then I come back, right? And so that is something that we want to be aware of, that we will improve, and that it will take some time. And even if we're doing 5% focus practice during a practice session, we're doing more than what most people ever will do. Taking this approach is somewhat life-changing. And if we can slowly increase the amount of minutes that we're able to maintain focus, then we are probably going to be improving quite quickly. And I hope that we will find that. So test this theory and let others know about it, right? If you've been playing for quite a while and you found, oh, like nobody's ever told me to do this, that, or the other, or people have told me but I've never done it, this is your opportunity now to try it out. And you can think about our mind as like a dog. Now, whatever connotation you want to take, I actually quite like dogs, right? But we can think about it like a dog on a walk. You have a goal. You're taking the dog for a walk. You're going to go around the park or whatever. You hope the dog does their business or whatever, and then the dog gets some exercise, and then you come home. So you're walking to the park, and the dog might not know where you're going, or it may, because they're intelligent animals as well. But even if the dog knows where you're going, oftentimes you'll be walking, not running, but the dog will want to be running, right? This is likened to how fast we want to play things right off the bat. People are always trying to speed up, even to the point where they're playing songs faster than the song was actually recorded. Let's slow down. You know, we can always rely on slowing down, taking our time, okay? If we do that, that's already huge. slow down. We don't want to sprint and get ahead of ourselves, and we'll be choking ourselves, right? Like the dog on the leash. What else does a dog do? It will veer off course. It'll go sniff a tree. It'll sniff over here. It'll say hey to another dog. It'll go over here. It'll be going all over the place. And what don't we like when a dog is on a walk is when they do that. The dog is veering off this way. The dog is veering off this way. What do we do when our dog, if you have a dog or not, it's irrelevant, but when the dog is veering off this way, sniffing this thing, wanting to go all over the place, when you have to go, dude, you want to go to the park. The dog wants to go to the park as well, but it's going off course. So what do? You maybe give it a second, and then you go, come on, buddy, come on. And you give it a little tug, right? And it might be resistant. And then you give it a little stronger tug, but you never really want to yank the dog because that's cruel, right? We don't want to hurt the dog. We don't want to be mean to the dog. We don't want to be mean to us when we get distracted, right? And our attention is much like that. It'll be going, and then it'll go off here. And then we lightly kind of course correct. We continue, it'll go off. And then we course correct, and then we might get a good chunk, but then it'll veer off again, right? And we want to have compassion for the dog. We might get frustrated with the dog sometimes, but we don't want to hurt the animal. So we can treat our mind much like this, a dog on a walk. You don't want to yank the dog back. We want to be kind to ourselves. You want to treat yourself like you would treat your best friend. Hopefully you are nice to your best friend. Sometimes best friends can have quite disparaging language towards one another, but generally speaking, they're your best friend because you actually quite love them. So if somebody you didn't know was talking to your best friend in a disparaging way, you'd probably stand up for them. So we want to stand up for ourselves, much like that. Okay? And so we want to treat our mind like it's a dog on a leash. We don't have to identify with the mind, but we let it do its thing, but then we bring it back to course. We have to remember that focus is quite binary. It's either there or it's not. And there could be an in-between part that I'm not recognizing, but it typically seems like our mind is on the task at hand or it is not. And much like many binaries, usually they end up being a spectrum, right? And I'm open to that. But in that, we want to try to have our focus as much as we can be aware of it in the side of the spectrum of being on task rather than off task. Now, if we're trying to be creative, for instance, it can be quite helpful to kind of let our mind meander a bit to create new ideas. And that's okay, right? And this is kind of a different thing. But if we're trying to improve skills directly, or improve the skills to be able to facilitate better creativity, this is what we want to be trying to do. Stay on task and be compassionate with ourselves when we go off task.